Welcome to Cedar Circle Farm's wedding arranging area. My name's Michelle. We've probably been talking for months now, and I'm sorry that you cannot be here in person with us today, but I'm happy to share this video with you, and hopefully you find it helpful as you're arranging your wedding flowers. I have collected a variety of vases in different shapes and sizes, so you'll have a good idea of how to work with each of them depending on what your vases look like. The first thing that you want to think about when you start arranging is that you want to make sure your vases have been washed and that they have nice, clean, cool water in them. You don't want really warm water in these because it can cause some flowers to open up very quickly. And you don't want really cold water in here because it can prevent other varieties from taking up the amount of water that they need to stay fresh. So when I start arranging, I always begin with a filler. Something that has a nice spray of flowers or a good sturdy stem, and you should have a variety of things to choose from in your flowers that we cut for you. When I start arranging in the jar, I always pull the jar up to the edge of the table, and I like to kind of gauge where my stem is going to sit based off of the table and the bottom of the jar. So that way you're not cutting your stems too short or having to pull them in and out of the jar multiple times, because once this becomes full of flowers, that will become more difficult and it will kind of pull them out and it could mess up your arrangement. So I just get a good gauge on that, and then I trim the stem and I can drop it in, and that's just right where I wanted it. If you have something like this that has multiple branching points, you can go ahead and trim those, and this will allow it to take up water for each of those stems, and it's a little bit easier and they'll last longer that way. The other thing that you want to pay attention to is the amount of foliage and leaves that is on the stem. We've probably left a decent amount on there. Anything that's going to be below the water level in the vase, you should take off, because that's going to make the water cloudy, and the breaking down of the leaves will clog up the stems, and then your flowers won't last as long. When you are cutting your stems, you want to make sure that you cut them on as sharp of an angle as possible. This will allow them to take up more water. If you cut them straight across, they're going to sit flat on the bottom of the vase, and they're just not going to get as much water. So on an angle, removing foliage, and using the table. And I have pre-cut some stems here, so you don't have to watch me measure every single one. I also have a piece of baby's breath here. Another thing that you can do if you find that you want to use a certain filler but that it's too big, like a baby's breath or a hydrangea, is you can simply go in and trim off some of the bloom, and that just thins it out a little bit, so it makes it a little bit more delicate, but it's still a really nice filler. Now, a lot of times from people that do arranging, you will hear that there's a rule of 3, that your arrangements need to be very matchy. But really the fun of do-it-yourself flowers is this is your vision, it's your wedding, and you can make them look like whatever you want them to look like. So don't worry too much about trying to have a count on flowers, again, unless that's what you would like to see. But I just kind of start tucking them in after I get fillers. And one thing that I look for as I'm picking out flowers for my arrangement is different textures in the petals, different styles of blossoms, different fullnesses, just things that make it really interesting. You're going to hear a tractor going by. We are still on a farm, and I apologize for that being in the background. Now, the other thing when you're arranging, if you can hear me, is that you can make your arrangement as full or as wispy and delicate as you want. I'll probably stop here. I think you could maybe tuck in 1 or 2 more flowers there in the center, just to find, whoops, I broke that one. That happens sometimes too. Yeah, so, just make it what you want to see and have fun with it is the most important part. So I will call that one done. Small mason jars are probably not much different than the large ones. They are really popular for people because they have thin necks on them and they kind of support the flowers without having to, fuss around with tape and wire. If you do find yourself needing tape or wire, Mason jars often have little caps that have a mesh lining that you can just screw on. You can get them at any craft store or online. And you can also get very thin, clear tape and tape over in a grid pattern, and that'll support your flower stems as well if you're having difficulty arranging. Another thing, since we're talking about supporting flowers, is if you have a really shallow container that is not clear, you can even get a ball of chicken wire and stick that into the container and then just arrange from there. If you don't have any wire or you don't want to use it, and you have a very shallow container like this, I strongly recommend starting off with a very thick filler like a baby's breath or a yarrow or a status, just to give you the support for those heavier stems, because you're cutting these very short and they can get a little jumpy. So that would be that one. This one has a wide neck to it. This can also be troublesome for people sometimes when they start arranging. I have put a bunch of filler in here just to get started, and I know it doesn't look like much now, but once you start, these ones are also harder to use the table trick on, so sometimes you do have to go back and forth. But once you get that good base, you can really start tucking in the bigger flowers that you like, and you'll be surprised at how quickly that fills in. And you can see that I'm just sticking them in here because of that filler. It's really supporting those flower heads and keeping them from wiggling all over the jar. And it's also okay to change your mind if you decide something's a little too short or it's not what you were looking for. You should have enough of a variety of flowers from us that you can play around with it and really find something that you like. Next, I'm gonna go over here. The other thing that you would like to keep in mind while you're doing your arranging is where your guests are going to be in regards to your arrangements. If you're going to have this in the center of the table and people are going to be eating and trying to talk to each other, you probably want to avoid doing anything too wide or too tall, just because it does get in the way a little bit. And again, you can make this whatever you want. You can fill it in more, you can do a little less, you can pick different flowers, bigger flowers, a bunch of tiny flowers. There is really no right or wrong way to do this. We have already arranged a large arrangement. If you are doing something for the altar or at the bottom of your arbor, you might have a larger container. This, again, we should have given you a bunch of filler, starting with those fillers and really just tucking in around that is the way to go. The fun thing with the really large ones is that you can add those really dramatic pieces like the little grasses and the different textured things to just kind of make it airy, a lot of points of interest, and they're just super fun to work with. So hopefully you have a large jar that you can play around with too. And the other one that a lot of people have been doing is bud vases. Now, these are really fun because you can go very minimal with these, really wispy details, and lots of them clustered together. If you're doing bud vases and you have a very few flowers in here, do pay attention to what you're choosing. Make sure that they're really interesting, they're really, working well with each other. And you can also, tuck in a larger flower into a bud vase, and that's okay too, if you want it to be a little bit more full and dramatic. So bud vases are a lot of fun to play with. If you have something that has a really skinny neck, pay attention to the size of the stems. If you've got like a wine bottle or something like this and you're trying to fit in big dramatic flowers, you could probably only fit 3 to 4 sunflowers and you might not have a lot of room for other things. But since I have a sunflower, we'll go ahead do my table trick. We'll see how many we can fit in here. It might not be the most beautiful arrangement, but I do just want to show you how the big stems and the small necks kind of take up space very quickly. You can almost not even get it in there. So you can kind of see how it gets awkward and bulky, so do just pay attention to that and try to find some things that'll give you that dramatic edge that you're looking for, but that might have skinnier stems. And don't be afraid to really just play around with different options. And I also would like to recommend, if you don't have a pair of really sharp scissors, you should find some. Even the paper cutting scissors, if you get a brand new pair, they can last you through arranging. But if you have some floral shears, they do make a world of difference, especially for some of the bigger stems like the sunflowers or the amaranthus. I'm arranging this one a little bit more towards you than me, so I'm not sure what it's looking like on that side, but I think that you get the idea. Plop that one in, and yeah. You know, and the other fun thing is, don't be afraid to let your arrangements be a little uneven and just kind of free flowing. I think it just makes it so much more fun to look at, and it gives you a lot more room to tuck in those little accents that really make it fun to look at. So this is just a small collection of vases that we put together now, and I think you'll see, if you were to have all of your tables out and these beautiful colorful flowers, you'd have a very lovely wedding. So I hope that you have found this helpful. If you find yourself struggling or have any questions, please don't hesitate to call the farm and ask for me. I'm happy to make myself available in any way. You can also send me an email. I usually have my phone on me, and I will get back to you as soon as I can. So happy arranging, and congratulations.